Chaos AD, tanks on the street. What do these words mean? I'm going to find out as I take a look at the classic Sepultura album, Chaos AD. Bit dramatic, that, wasn't it? Now, before I get started, I'm going to I'll just give you a word of warning. I'm going to go into the history of this album a bit. So if you just want to skip into the actual review of the songs itself, have a look in the description below, and I'll put in a timestamp of where it starts. I don't want to limit myself to what I can do on these reviews. I want to talk as much as I want. Deep themes. Now, this is the first in an ongoing series, which I don't really see any end in sight for this, because this is basically going to be the albums of my life, and there are no shortage of them, absolutely no shortage whatsoever. I've got years worth to discover, or should I say to talk about with these, and I'm starting off with Sepultura's Chaos AD. I don't know why, but when I came up with the idea of doing this series, it was just the first album that sprang to mind. I think as I'm getting older and time's getting less and less, I think it's always important to go with a gut instinct. If that's what you feel, then, you know, maybe that's what you should do. So yes, Chaos AD. What a fucking album. What a glorious album this is. Now, I've listened to Soulfly, I've listened to the Derek Green era of Sepultura. There's some decent stuff, and I think the latest Cavalera Conspiracy album was Psychosis, was fantastic, real return to form, but nothing has ever grabbed me quite like this lineup of Sepultura, and probably anyone who's watching this will feel the same way. There was just something so special about this band. I loved pretty much their entire discography. Heavy vibes. Morbid Visions, Bestial Devastation, not so much. I mean, that was a band definitely trying to work out how they were. Schizophrenia, great album. Beneath the Remains, fantastic. Arise, absolutely amazing. And Roots, groundbreaking. But whenever I think of Sepultura, Chaos AD is the album that immediately springs to mind. And with good reason, because it's the first album that I got into. It was right on the cusp of when I was going from listening to bands like Queen, Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Nirvana. I just discovered Pantera, and I was getting into heavier and heavier music, and Sepultura were right there to take me to the next level. Intensity. I remember when I first started listening to this band, it was I was immediately taken aback, I guess, by the legitimacy of them. There was just a realness to them that a lot of bands don't have. I remember seeing live footage of them as well. There was all this sort of kind of seemed like an element of danger. There was something very real about their shows. They meant every fucking note they played, and it really shone through. They were definitely a band that they walked the walk. They didn't just talk it, they walked it. Full of attitude, full of aggression. Phenomenal band. Such an amazing band back at that time. Amazing. Not my funniest video. Andy Wallace produced this album. He mixed the Arise album, and I think on the basis of that they decided to use him for this album. Does a fantastic job. Lots of different styles in this album. It evolves on from the full-on thrash assault, death metal assault, I guess, of Arise, and moves it on. Definitely more elements of hardcore industrial, acoustic guitars, more spiritual moments. And they recorded the album at Rockfield Studios in Wales, and that actually becomes a very important part of the overall album, as we'll hear later on. Nothing unusual about a middle-aged guy filming himself in a field. There's no way you can talk about Chaos AD without mentioning the artwork, the cover especially. It's just hypnotising. I used to just stare at this album cover for hours when I got it, just trying to work out what it meant. There's definitely elements of being part of a machine, part of a factory line of mass-produced robots being covered up and censored, told what to do. Very thought-provoking cover. Michael Whelan was the artist who did this. He was using original sketches, Xeroxes, and what else did he do? Oh, and paints. Hypnotising, engrossing piece of art entitled Cacophony. Look at the cover. I think you can work it out. Not only is this album heavy musically, but it's very heavy lyrically. The theme of this album is very heavy. There's no fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons type of stuff on this. This is dealing with very heavy subject matter, political shit. Many of the themes that are covered on here is manipulation from the powers that be, war, being an individual, striving to be an individual against the masses, striving to be yourself and not bow down to what you're made to be. Yeah, last thing before I actually get into some of the songs, please do, as is quite often the case with a lot of bands, their earlier albums are dealing with their immediate surroundings. This can be said for Metallica, for Biohazard, Machine Head, all of them. Starts off where they grow up, which makes perfect sense, and then in this case, as Sepultura were touring the world on a rise, they started looking at what was going on in their home country of Brazil, and more specifically some of the atrocities that were going on there that nobody else in the world was really talking about or was even aware of. And this would become an integral part of the writing for Chaos AD. Nobody looks at me at all. Opening track of the album, Refuse Resist. What an opening. Starts out with Max's unborn son, Xeon, his heartbeat in utero. That's a Nirvana album. Starts out with his heartbeat, and before slamming into Igor's tribal drumming, which is such a signature sound of Sepultura, that tribal percussion that you hear. I think it's Batacuda, I think, is the influence for the drumming. I seem to remember reading somewhere that I actually got that information from the booklet that came with the CD. Max and Igor, when they were younger, when they used to go to football matches, Brazilian football matches, how Igor would jump on, I think they'd like play upturned buckets and all that sort of thing. Now this real tribal percussion, there'd be thousands of these guys just playing, and obviously it had a huge influence on his playing. But this is a straight up protest song. This is a straight up anti-authority, anti-police really song. I mean, the cover of the single itself is if I remember rightly, it's a Korean protester who is charging at a police line with shields, and he's got a petrol bomb and he's throwing it at them. Chaos AD, Tanks on the Streets. If you're a metalhead, you know this song, come on. Next up is Territory. I remember the first time I heard this song. This was actually the very first Sepultura song that I personally ever heard. I bought the single on a whim. I hadn't actually read that much about the band or knew much about them. I was literally out one day, saw the Territory single, liked the look of it. It literally just come out, and it was one of those sorts of purchases. Sorts of. It was one of those purchases where I bought it. I probably didn't listen to it for a good 2 or 3 weeks. I was going through that phase of just buying everything under the sun, and it kind of got left to the wayside. And I remember I was skiving work one day. I was playing truant. I was listening to Coma from Use Your Illusion 1, Guns N' Roses, over and over again, which is probably the heaviest song Guns N' Roses have done. And I was loving that song so much, but I was kind of in that need for something heavier. And I listened to some Pantera, Metallica, and it was good, but it wasn't quite there. And then I remembered I had this Sepultura single, Territory. So I tried that out, and wow, drums. Pretty much just listened to that for the entire rest of the day. I think you also had Biotech's Godzilla and Policia, which was a cover, great cover. So 3 amazing tracks. Introduction to Sepultura. Started out again with that amazing those amazing drums from Igor. Just real groove laden, but heavy as hell, slow and plodding. I think I seem to remember that Sad But True by Metallica was a bit of an influence on this album in terms of the slower, in doing some of the slower stuff like this, and Amen were an answer to that slower, plodding, groovier, just heavy side of metal. In terms of the subject matter for this song, this was actually written about the conflict between Israel and Palestine, but I think it's safe to say that it could apply to any war, the war for territory. Fuck off, Bixby. Next up, Slave New World. This was co-written, lyrically at least, with Evan Seinfeld, and this addresses censorship. The single cover for this was a clenched fist, and on the wrist was a tattooed barcode to signify how we're all product. And the lyrics are definitely addressing that, standing against the powers that be and striving to be an individual, striving to be oneself. Great song. Political intrigue and stuff. Next up is Amen. As I mentioned earlier, this has that slower, sad but true sort of style, plodding heaviness, as opposed to some of the more thrash and death metal orientated sounds that we've heard from Sepultura in the past. And this was written about the Waco disaster. Starts out with an eerie spoken word piece by Max, and has some quite hypnotising female vocals as well. Kind of very eerie. Good song. I think this was written by I think the lyrics were written by Andreas Kisser on this album as well. On this song, should I say. Next up, one of the true turning points for Sepultura, getting much more with their spiritual side in this song, Cockeye Ovis, I think it's pronounced. This is an instrumental piece done entirely acoustically. Drums, bass, guitar, everything acoustic instruments, no amplification on these. And as I said, a purely instrumental piece, and the song is named after a tribe of the same name who committed mass suicide in protest to the government who was trying to take away their land and their beliefs. Heavy, heavy song. This may be an acoustic song, but this is heavy. So they did this song live, or at least the drumming section of it, and it pretty much became a live staple for as long as the band remained together. And I seem to remember Pantera joining them on stage for this, all the band members getting together to do the drumming section at the end, and just Also worth mentioning, this was ruined in the ruins of Chepstow Castle, which gives it that that ambience and that live sound. that I guess you can't replicate any other way. Amazing song. Next up we have Propaganda. Always question what you are told. Don't believe what you see, don't believe what you read. In other words, saying that you should think for yourself. Don't just take everything at face value. Don't believe what the newspapers, the media, the government is telling you. And just think for yourself. Read between the lines. There are a lot of people who could stand to learn something from this song. Biotech is Godzilla is next. What a song this is. This was actually written by Jello Biafra of Dead Kennedys fame. According to the liner notes that I've read, this was written after Jello attended an exhibition in Rio in 1992, and it was a world conference about ecology in Rio de Janeiro. And his theory was that scientists, politicians were basically allowing scientists to experiment new diseases, man-made maybe, I'm not sure. I mean so it was experimenting with diseases on people, street people who've been kidnapped, hid from you, as the lyrics state. And the lyrics of this song end with biotech is AIDS, theorizing that AIDS is a man-made virus. Certainly very thought-provoking. Nomad is the next song, another slow plodding one, and this explores people, both tribal, indigenous people, and people from anywhere around the world, I guess, who are being expelled from their homeland for purposes of development or whatever it may be. Another heavy song lyrically. We who are not as others. Not much to the way of the lyrics in this one, but again, continuing the theme of being an individual and celebrating in the fact that you're not like other people, and you should be proud of who you are, and not letting other people's opinions of you shape what you are. So much of that, so many miserable people around the world because they're not truly who they are, because we're judged so much by others. Fuck it. Be yourself. Whew. Next up is one of the standout tracks for me personally, Manifest. This is heavy as fuck. This song starts out with an imitated broadcast of what could have possibly gone on. Basically, this song documents the make sure I get this right, Carinduru massacre. This was a penitentiary in Brazil that was woefully overpopulated, and a riot broke out, and they were able to contain it. And as a result, the army police, the military police were called in to contain it, which resulted in 111 inmates being killed, many of whom were found with their hands held over their faces or behind the head, indicating that they were in defensive positions, i.e. no threat. This was quite rightly considered a major human rights violation in Brazil. I think a lot of the police, the military police involved, were sentenced to very, very heavy sentences themselves. Yeah, very, very heavy song in both music and subject matter. Penultimate song, is it penultimate? Is that what it is? The second to last is The Hunt, and this is a cover of the New Model Army song, which is a great song, a truly great song. Has to be said, Sepultura totally make this song their own. This is a song about Street Justice. This is a song about people taking the law into their own hands. A group of people who are sick and tired of drug pushers, pimps, bullies, people who just intimidate and make lives a misery for those around them, standing up to them. We follow you back to your front door and we wait for you outside. Not everybody here is scared of you. Fantastic, awesome stuff. Clenched Fist is the final song on the album, and what a closer this is. This is basically, lyrically, thematically, this is about just having had enough. Having had enough of being silent. Having had enough of being oppressed and fighting back and not taking it anymore. Very heavy song, very inspirational lyrics. Got a real awesome thrash out piece midway through this song as well. I haven't really discussed the music too much on this album, but I think it's because thematically, lyrically, there's so much going on it to talk about. It's an incredible album, still stands up to this day. In preparation for this video, I've been listening to this at least once a day for the last couple of weeks, and it's been a real pleasure to get back to this album. It still holds up today. You, sir, are a bore. So many albums, so many bands. There was something about production when you got to the 90s, a hairy bore, where it feels like they just really figured a lot of stuff out. Dirty, hairy bore. And a lot of that early 90s music, bore, and onwards, so much of it really holds up today. Bore boy. This really feels like an album that wouldn't be out of place if it was released today. Bore, bore, bore. So relevant still, due in no small part to the subject matter. The freshness of the songs, the immediacy of the songs, the anger, the attitude, the passion that is portrayed in this album is what makes it such a classic and one of my personal albums of my life. I will always come back to this album. So good, so amazing. So that's Chaos AD. If you've made it this far, if you enjoyed this, if you found it informative, if you learned anything from it at all, if you got anything from it at all, drop a like, drop a comment, subscribe to the channel. Plenty more coming up, and